Elderly woman's strange bucket list wish quickly lands her in jail. Josie Birds, a 93-year-old grandmother from Manchester, England, had a bucket list full of things she wanted to complete before age got the best of her. However, after reading her list, her daughter Pam immediately called the police. The Manchester, England, police are just like any other team of dedicated officers assigned with protecting citizens. They've seen it all. Being a cop means keeping your cool, but sometimes even the most experienced officers face something that stops them in their tracks. This is Josie Birds, a 93-year-old grandmother from Manchester who opened her front door one day to the sight of two police officers ready to arrest her. But she hadn't done anything wrong. Her daughter Pam contacted the local Manchester Police Department days before Josie was arrested. She asked them to show up unannounced at her mother's home and slap her in cuffs. A few days later, two armed officers arrived at the doorstep of Josie Birds and knocked. It took a minute for the frail woman to answer, but when she did, she welcomed them inside. Now, you might have seen movies or television shows where teams of officers rush in and take down the bad guys in hardcore fashion, but this wasn't that kind of arrest. The officers gently clipped handcuffs around Josie's wrists and read the woman her rights. They tried to keep straight faces the whole time, but everyone was having a blast, especially Josie's daughter Pam. The two officers placed Josie into the back of their vehicle and drove her down to the precinct. Once there, they sat her in a holding room while she was booked. After the police filled out all the appropriate paperwork, they walked the cuffed grandmother to an empty cell and instructed her to sit on the bed. Once she sat down, the bars slammed shut. Strangely enough, the elderly woman was thrilled at the whole ordeal and was beaming the entire time. Apparently, she had written about her own arrest long before her daughter ever tipped off the cops. Getting arrested had been something on Josie's bucket list for a long time, and with her daughter's help, she was finally able to check that goal off the list. An officer even sat with her for a short while before releasing her with a huge smile. It was an unusual case, but certainly not an unfamiliar one. In the town of Stoke Bishop, Bristol, lived 104-year-old Anne Brokenbrow. And lived in a senior home, and the workers would often have various activities for the residents to engage in. But there was one in particular Anne was excited about. Workers placed a board up in the community center room asking residents to fill out a form stating one wish they wanted granted. It was part of a charity initiative, so Anne made her bizarre request. The wholesome woman who never committed a crime in her entire life wanted to know what it was like to be on the other side of the law. As odd as the request was, Bristol police had an answer. After being contacted by the senior home workers, several uniformed officers went to the home to arrest Anne. As soon as Anne saw them approaching, she knew her request was granted. Because of Anne's age, the officers were extremely careful slapping on the metal handcuffs, but Anne was more than happy to have her hands bound together. After all, she wanted it done. After cuffing her and reading her rights, Anne was escorted by a couple of the senior workers to a police car, where she was carefully placed in the front seat. It was really happening for her. The officer who was driving made sure she was comfortable before taking her away to the station for booking. And could finally say she didn't live her entire life with such saint-like qualities. The officers and workers involved were so thrilled they could make an elderly woman's dream come true. At 104 years old, she was likely the oldest person Bristol police ever arrested by a long shot. Josie and Anne's time in the slammer was all good fun. However, there's a whole group of elderly folks in Japan who are purposely breaking the law, and it's a lot more significant than some bucket list check mark. Toshio Takata struggled to make ends meet. After moving into a halfway house, it got to the point where the 62-year-old had trouble buying supplies for his beloved art projects. This old dog would have to learn some new tricks if he wanted to survive. Traditionally speaking, the Japanese treat their elders quite well. Old-fashioned standards oblige younger people to not only care for their parents and grandparents, but to treat them with the utmost respect. In the modern age, however, more and more senior citizens like Toshio are feeling left behind. His family has more or less dissolved, and he's grown estranged from his brothers, 2 ex-wives, and 3 children. Toshio only has himself. Across the country, older Japanese citizens are unable to find a support system. There's just so many of them. Over a third of the national population is now 60 or older, and the senior citizens have outnumbered the children for years. With the number of seniors only increasing, Toshio saw some of his contemporaries lose just about everything. Even with pensions and benefits, they couldn't afford food and housing. Some were even put out on the street. But Toshio found a solution. Nowadays, Toshio lives comfortably. He's got 3 square meals a day, plenty of staff on hand to provide for his every need, and plenty of similarly aged friends to spend time with. It all started with a bicycle. This bicycle didn't belong to him. Toshio found it parked on a street corner in Hiroshima, and he just rode off with it. But this was no mere joyride. Toshio knew exactly where he was headed. He rode to the nearest police station. Approaching the front desk, the old man calmly informed the authorities that he stole the bicycle. With no other choice, the police cuffed the seemingly harmless senior and brought him in. The court sentenced him to 1 year in prison for petty theft. Did Toshio have an uncharacteristic lapse in judgment? Had he been hit with a wave of remorse once he hopped on the bike? Nope. The theft, the arrest, the sentence, it had all been part of his plan. With no criminal history, in the Japanese prison system, he enjoyed the stability behind bars. So he served his year worry-free for the most part. Then, once he got out, something peculiar happened. Toshio threatened women in the park with a knife. He now claims that he didn't mean any harm, he simply wanted the police to lock him up once again, this time for a longer period of time. A single year wouldn't cut it anymore. Now 69 years old, Toshio wakes up in a cell every morning, but he does so with a purpose. He has a place where he belongs and all the time in the world to work on his art. Strangely enough, he's not the only one to enjoy life behind bars. In a trend that no social scientist saw coming, 1 in 5 Japanese inmates is 60 years or older. And these aren't hardened criminals either. The police nab nearly all these gray-haired cons for minor offenses. Many shoplift from stores either as a means to feed themselves for free or to get caught on purpose. With Japan's relatively severe penalties for theft, they all end up incarcerated. This is no short-term solution for seniors either. Roughly a quarter of them commit another offense soon after their release, leading to an even longer sentence. But why is prison such an attractive place for them to spend their golden years? Like Toshio, most older inmates will claim economic reasons. Besides living for free behind bars, they can still continue to collect their pensions. They'll have some nice savings once free. However, this may not tell the whole story. According to Kenichi Yamada, director of a rehabilitation center, elderly inmates' real motivation may be loneliness. He theorizes that they usually have lost their loved ones and fail to rediscover their places in mainstream society. Regardless of why Japanese seniors are seeking out cells, jails have drastically evolved to accommodate them. Facilities and events have become more accessible to older demographics, and specialized guards have joined to help care for these prisoners. For now, prison life remains more comfortable than freedom for Toshio and his ilk. They feel certain that there is nothing for them outside the jail walls. However, a large segment of senior inmates do have one key difference from Toshio. An increasing number of them are women. Although women across the board are statistically less likely to commit a crime than men, female seniors who live alone are particularly affected by poverty and isolation. Prison offers struggling women a way to escape their burdens and anxiety, though none of them process their strange path the same way. While some freed inmates admit they feel guilty, others look back on their incarceration with nostalgia. With the population of senior citizens on the rise, Japan will have to find a more efficient way to care for them. If they do not enact radical reforms, the Japanese will find themselves in a prison of their own making. Unfortunately, loneliness and isolation drive seniors to act out all over the globe. As he walked across the Redding, California, soil for the first time, Kevin Burns' heart filled with anticipation. He thought about new friends, career prospects, romantic possibilities. But it was his elderly neighbor that won most of his attention. Though her house seemed like it could hold a full family, 68-year-old Ruth Ratliff lived next to Kevin all by herself. Odder still, she seemed to never spend any time inside the house. She was always in her parked car, eating. It didn't take long for Kevin to puzzle out the reason why Ruth lived inside her car. She stocked up on all the necessary supplies and set up a bed of sorts in the back seat. She even kept her small dog in there with her. But at the same time, Ruth's car was totally broken down. Not only could she not drive anywhere, but she also couldn't even turn on the heat during cold nights. Concerned, Kevin felt obliged to step in. Why didn't she just move back into her house? For a long time, Ruth remained coy about why she avoided her home like the plague. Kevin's repeated questioning eventually brought the truth to light. "My home has become a dump," Ruth admitted, "because my best friend died, and I lost my mind." Ruth then made a request of Kevin. Could she go inside her home and find a misplaced photo of her parents? She feared she would forget what they looked like. Kevin accepted the quest, opened the house's front door, and walked into an absolute nightmare. "My home has become a dump" didn't do justice to the abysmal state of Ruth's house. While it clearly was a nice residence years ago, it was now unlivable. A rancid odor made it hard to breathe, and trash and human waste covered the floor of every room. It became evident that Ruth was a hoarder, incapable of parting with any kind of object. Without some outside help, Kevin realized that Ruth could never return to a normal life. Just as he was about to give up and duck out for fresh air, a strange detail caught his eye. A makeshift shelf leaned against one wall, and it looked like there was an entire room behind it. Was there a chance that this hidden room escaped the noxious effects of Ruth's hoarding? Kevin slid the shelf over and entered the black space. Curiously, as Kevin's eyes adjusted to the darkness, he saw what looked like a child's bedroom. He peered at some old photographs taped to the wall. There was no sign of Ruth's parents, but he did see a photo of some kids that looked like Ruth. Kevin was about to give up when he spotted the corner of a photo sticking out from the cabinet. It was just the one Ruth asked for. He headed for the door to share the good news until he came across the biggest problem of all. Gazing up at the ceiling, Kevin noticed many of the rooms were overrun with black mold. While trash could be cleaned up, this poisonous fungus made the house uninhabitable. There was so much of it, Kevin wondered if it could spread to other houses. Ruth was heartbroken to hear about the decay of her once beloved home, though she at least agreed to call the fire department. They soon arrived with a truckload of equipment. As it turns out, however, they were not aiming to save the house. The fire chief explained that the black mold presented a toxic risk that they needed to wipe out immediately. As they set up a perimeter of flames around the condemned house, Kevin held Ruth's hand and laid out a plan for the future. Together, the neighbors watched Ruth's house go up in flames. Although he knew it was for the best, Kevin felt her pain at all the memories burning inside of it. All the evidence of Ruth's past was gone. Only the woman herself could reveal the truth now, if she wanted to. Before he could delve into the mysteries of the strange photographs and the hidden room, however, Kevin needed to make accommodations for his aggrieved neighbor. He lacked the money to put her up in his own place, and so he set up a GoFundMe page. Amazingly, the community rallied around Ruth, and a local nonprofit reached out to Kevin. They ran a nursing home for the elderly, where Ruth could have a real roof over her head for the first time in years. Unfortunately, they couldn't take in Ruth's chihuahua. But Kevin took care of that. He adopted the small dog, and the two of them visited Ruth each week. Over time, Ruth settled back into a regular enough life to regain her mental stability. She began to share the secrets that she was so desperate to hide from the world. Over a cup of coffee, Kevin finally learned the truth behind the secret bedroom. It didn't belong to a son or daughter, as Ruth never had kids. It was her own childhood bedroom. After her parents and husband passed away, leaving Ruth alone, she sealed it up. She couldn't bear to face all the memories and dreams it represented. Ruth could never go back to her old life, that much was clear. But in her new home, she rediscovered comforts and friendships that she would have forsaken if she stayed alone in her car. Thanks to Kevin's foray into her house, Ruth's hopes for the future are burning bright.